Good evening, everyone. I apologize you can't see us right now with the way the system is. You can see the PowerPoint that's on the screen. Welcome to our special board meeting tonight to discuss the draft of the reopening plan and our options that are available as we approach September and try to figure out on July 30th where we're at now and where we're going to be in September. So with that said, I'm going to go through the plan tonight. But as this is a board meeting tonight, I want to begin tonight with the Pledge of Allegiance. So everybody please stand for the pledge. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. In addition, we have one agenda item on tonight, as I mentioned. The only agenda item we have for tonight is the reopening plan. So could I get a motion from one of the board members to approve the one discussion item for tonight, the reopening plan? Janine? Charlie? All in favor of the agenda? Thank you, everybody. Okay, let me begin the reopening plan tonight and our board discussion and then our public comment period following to give you a little background on where we're at for right now. So when we look at the regulations that are in place at this point in time, when we look at the time period we have between now and September, I think the biggest thing we need to understand at this point in time is that this reopening plan that we're submitting is a living document. We're being asked to submit a reopening plan, a framework for what we think we can do in September with over 5 weeks still left to play. And that's important to note because this document that we're going to submit, hopefully by tomorrow, is a document that I anticipate will have some changes to it, will have some updates. I anticipate regulations changing as we move forward here. We all know that Governor Cuomo is going to speak next week. His announcement is unknown at this time as to where we are. Our job here in West Canada and all the schools across the state is to create a plan that takes into account 80 plus assurances and create a plan that's easily able to move from in-person to remote and provide multiple options to do so. So that's really the first part about this. And I don't want to sugarcoat what we're doing tonight either, because this plan and the planning for what we're doing here under these regulations has been a real challenge. It's not fun because the outcome of it is not exactly what we want. Regardless of the plan that we adopt and move forward with, it's not West Canada or any school as we know it right now by September under the current regulations. Schools have been asked basically to put something together. They've been giving this puzzle and shared this with other groups with puzzle pieces that don't quite fit together just right. We found as we go through and we get input from everybody that when you try to move something or try to make some other adjustment, it kind of dominoes and affects the other adjustments or other parts of the whole plan. So nothing just fits just correct, and I've kind of come to the point as we've gotten through where we take the input, we look at it through the eyes of everybody, the community, the parents, the teachers, the faculty, the staff, administrators, the Board of Education, and everybody, and try to figure out the best way to put this plan together. So tonight I want to go through that. There's some key items that I want to go through. There are a lot of questions that I'm unable to answer at this point in time. The way this process will work today is hopefully I can go through the presentation with you. You can take notes and develop questions along the way. And then we'll have a board discussion about that and offer input and comments and different things about that. And then I'll open it up to the public. Public that are in person will be able to ask questions, and any public that submitted questions will be able to do so. So for public questions, again, thank you to those that have already emailed some. We'll address those tonight, hopefully for you. As I go through the presentation, you can continue to email. This is Karen Sheets, our district clerk at ksheets@westcanada.org. In the coming days and weeks, you certainly can contact myself. My email's up there, and the school district phone number is there. These will be ongoing discussions throughout the month of August. As I stated, we're over 5.5 weeks before the start of school. That's, not a lot of time to prepare, but on the same token, it's like a year in COVID terms. So a lot could happen in the next 5.5 weeks that could adjust or adapt to things we're talking about. So what we're going to go through today with the reopening plan are the topics listed here. Aside from the introduction that I'm giving you now, we're going to go through a little history and background of this process. We're going to discuss all the mandated key components of the plan, health and safety, the facilities, child nutrition, transportation, social emotional well-being, school schedules, attendance, technology and connectivity, CTE and VP Tech, athletics and other extracurricular activities, special education, bilingual education, world languages, and staffing. So I want to start with the reopening background and guidance here. I'll leave this one here. The background of our guiding principles as we went through this plan, we looked at some, as I said, we looked through the eyes of everybody that would be impacted by all the decisions and the planning that we're doing here. But these key principles are really the important parts of this plan. Safeguarding the health and safety of our students and staff, providing an opportunity for all students to access education in the fall, monitoring the district students and staff, and when necessary, creating schedules to appropriately contain the COVID-19 spread. So key point to make at this point is all of these plans that we're developing need to be able to adjust very easily and very quickly. So when we create plans and options in terms of our educational plans for the fall, we need to be able to shift gears very quickly on the fly, especially if there is some sort of COVID identification and so forth in this process. So for example, if we are in person for periods of time, we need to be prepared to flop that to remote learning, just like we had to do in March. Difference being now in March, we weren't ready, and we kind of felt our way through this. We're expected to be ready in September with a more structured plan if we are forced to go to remote. The plan is going to emphasize equity, access, and support to the students and communities that have been impacted by this historic pandemic. There's fostering strong communication with our partners, including families, educators, board members, and staff. We factor into the decision-making the challenges to the physical safety, social, emotional well-being, and mental health needs of our students as a result of the closure, and supporting the diversity of learning needs and individual family situations that we know we have in this community. So the communication and the feedback process was a big part of this. This has really been going on since the closure and wondering what's going to happen in September. Sometimes from just small group local meetings to regional meetings to some of our board meetings that we've already had. We've been talking about this for a while. Things are kind of coming to clarity 2 weeks ago when we received the guidance from the state education department. Obviously, our administrators, our faculty and staff, our students and parents and guardians through multiple different means, including surveys that we're giving. The Board of Education, as they will continue to provide input tonight. The New York State Health Department, or the New York State Department of Health, our school physician, our employee unions that we have in this building, the New York State Education Department, the Board of Regents, the Center for Disease Control, regional task force that's been working throughout this whole process from a Herkimer County regional perspective. Our legal is a big part of all of this and what we're able to and what we're not. Labor relations, obviously we have a large staff and faculty that are impacted by this, and obviously the input that's been provided by our community members. So the platforms we've used here, if you can bear with me just to do some background here, we've been consistently using our district website. We have a devoted section now for COVID. So when you go to our website, you're able to click on those resources and go from there. We've used our district-wide emergency phone system consistently throughout this process. We've used email, text messaging, the district's social media or Facebook site, our correspondence with letters mailed home to parents throughout the process, our board meetings, which have been streamed as we are tonight, newsletters, and obviously the public forum that we're holding tonight. So we try to use as many different avenues to communicate, especially in situations where it's really difficult right now to meet in person. So I want to start with the largest category, which is health and safety, and go through some of the things that are included in our plan as a summary. First of all, the health and safety is the top priority of our plan. It's the focus of our plan. it's the main ingredient that we're instructed to follow, and there's many assurances that we have to adhere to if we're going to open up for in-person instruction. So first one is the home evaluation and temperature check. I want to start with this part of it. As we get into the month of August and we start to provide parents and guardians with guidance to this, all homes that we have kids coming from are going to be required each day to do their own home evaluation and temperature checks before their students come to school or before they ride the bus. This is a requirement, and it's something we're going to need assistance with for parents at home to, if their child is sick or is experiencing symptoms or is experiencing a temperature of 100 degrees or higher, that at that point in time, you don't attempt to send them home, because at that point, if you do send them in, obviously the safety issues that go along with that, but also the fact that we will be screening them as well when they get here. So there will be a requirement for home evaluations and temperature checks before you send your children to school for in-person instruction. Which gets me to the facility entry. When we get here, when you arrive to the school, our plan right now is to have 2 separate entrances. At those 2 separate entrances, we will have 2 nurses stationed there at this point in time, where they will be doing temperature checks and screenings on the way in through the door. That will be happening daily as kids come to school in the morning. So at any point in time, again, that a student arrives at school and is experiencing some sort of symptoms related to COVID, or has a temperature of 100 or higher, they will need to go to a designated isolation room, which is required by the district as well. And at that point in time, parents will be required to pick them up, and we will go through a process with the Department of Health, which I will discuss as we get through this presentation. But right now, we're looking at that piece of it. Daily health screenings. Every staff member, from the bus garage to teachers to the students, will be required to complete a brief assertion or survey that basically states that they were checked at home, that they haven't been in contact with anybody they know of who's had COVID within the last 14 days, et cetera, and submit that as validation to their home evaluation temperature check. All of our space in here will be designed with social distancing with a minimum of 6 feet apart in every space that we have in this building. We've begun the process of that as well. PPE will be required in the building. Masks will be required in the building for everybody in here. I see, you notice on the PowerPoint we have mask breaks. They are going to be required when social distancing occurs, but in cases where we're not able to maintain that social distance, which is a lot of the time in the school, especially when you've got kids and so forth around here, those masks are going to have to be worn and so forth. We will have masks, but I'm going to encourage parents as we move forward into August to find masks that are comfortable. Everybody who's been wearing the mask, is kind of adapted to a mask that fits them well and that feels a little bit more comfortable. So it's important that we do that. We will have masks to supply to them, and additional potential PPE things. Instruction on personal hygiene, the hand washing, and so forth will be a big part of our health plan. We'll be talking to students, to staff, and training them on personal hygiene and the importance of the hand washing and the social distancing and all the things that hopefully will make this plan successful. Visitors and vendors will be extremely limited to the building. They will be by really appointment only. They will face all the same screenings as everybody else once they come to the building. These are all requirements, so they will be temperature checked. They will be screened just like anybody else is there. I mentioned this already. Training is going to be a big part of this. Training our staff, training our community, helping to train our parents, helping to train our students on all the processes that are going to be implemented here, so that we can hopefully maintain that safe return. Screeners, I talked about those. They'll be screened on the way in. We're starting out with our nurses. They're the trained RNs that we have. We also have an LPN on staff who is our nurse for the buses that may be assisting with that. Again, as I talk about these things tonight, I have this vision, or we have this vision of how this will work. I don't think by any means this will be a perfect system to start. I anticipate us adjusting throughout the month of August a little bit. I anticipate adjustments once the kids get back here, if they get back here, in trying to make these things work. So as you can see, these time consumptions, when we get to the schedules, are going to become a piece of the day. So for example, in the morning, you know, the time period to get all the kids in here and get through that process is going to take much more time than it would in a normal situation where we have on buses and basically did. Again, I'll go over some of that when we get into the schedule piece. Signs and messaging, they are all been ordered. They will be throughout the building. They are required. We'll have signs, you know, that are helping to teach and identify the rules and regulations that you must follow in the building. Once you're in here, there'll be directional arrows, and where we can, we'll try to create one-way directions in some spots, and where we can't create one-way directions, we'll create lanes in the hallway so that we're separated. We're certainly, and I'll get into a lot of this as we get into the presentation, going to be limiting who's in the halls, how many are in the halls, the transitions, the number of transitions that are going to happen throughout this whole time. Our space design and capacity, I mean, everybody's heard about the social distancing. That's going to limit how many kids we can get into a classroom. We do have different size classrooms and different size spaces, so we're going to accommodate when we can the larger situations with those. You know, our typical classrooms fit anywhere from 10 to 12 students at the 6-foot distance. So we've measured out and we've laid out a few rooms already that are set. The rooms itself are going to be very limited. You are essentially going to have a desk, a filing cabinet, and student desks. That's what a classroom would look like for the most part. Not to say there won't be things on the walls and all those kinds of things, but the actual floor space will be limited because we need to maximize the amount of desks we can get in there. Meetings, a lot of virtual meetings. You know, we're going to encourage and set up parent meetings that are virtual when we can. There will be opportunities for in-person, but again, we're going to try to create as many virtual situations as we can for the safety of everyone. Additional items, restrooms. So restrooms, and I'll get into this a little bit with facilities as well. The cleaning of the restrooms, the occupancy of the restrooms, you know, one or possibly two at a time, depending on which restroom we're talking about, the size of that restroom. We're going to have to log that, track who, to ensure that people aren't into the restrooms. There isn't too many people in there at once. We're going to clean that throughout the day, similar to what you would see like at a throughway stop, I guess, where you see the cleaning and the log sheets and the log clipboards that are there. I mentioned the hallways and stairwells already, directional and you know, divisions side by side where we can't make directional arrows and so forth in there. Those are all going to be part of the school signal to the kids exactly where we're going. I mentioned the classrooms already. We're looking at, in most cases, 10 to 12 kids max in a room. There are, again, some spaces that we can go further with. Our nurse stations are going to be for our nurse stations like we always have. In other words, our nurse's office. But that's not the nurse's office for you know, prospective or potential COVID cases. In addition to that nurse's office, we have to have a separate isolation room in both buildings. So if there is any symptoms of COVID, even if it's not, that person needs to be moved from there and put into the isolation and sent home. At that point in time, the Department of Health becomes very involved with the whole process, and I'll get into that in a little bit as well. But just so we know, the nurse's office will be for the nurse's office, and the isolation room will be for prospective COVID cases. Security procedures, we will still have our resource officer here. He will be assisting with the security. There's certainly, we're going to multiple entrances, but on the same token, we're going to have adults at all these entrances as well. So we're going to maintain as many, if not more security pieces that we can. There's not going to be a lot of traffic in the halls, so you know, the limitation on that itself could create some enhanced security procedures. But again, security won't, for the most part, be changed too much here. Engineering controls, we had our architect and our engineer here this week. The controls for our air filtration systems, they've evaluated and putting through a report for us. We're making any necessary adjustments to meet any sort of air quality or air ventilation concerns we have and meet the requirements for that. We have clear guidance on cleaning, sanitation, and disinfection in the process and how often, that are all guided by Department of Health and CDC guidelines. We are creating procedures and policies in order to make all of those things happen in terms of cleaning and disinfection. In the building, there'll be a great deal more of that, especially in areas that they're more often touched, for lack of a better reason or explanation. Excuse me. Again, suspected or confirmed COVID cases, and those are two key terms. One of the questions we discussed with the Department of Health is, you know, in a school system, in a typical year in a school system, we're going to have in the elementary multiple fevers of 100. We could have multiple 100+ fevers, you know, in one day. You know, the question's asked, is that immediately treated as COVID? The answer is yes. Right now, yes. So if you are running a fever, the initial reaction to that is COVID, isolation, sent home. So the old 24-hour come back to school is not in place. Once you are sent home for that symptoms or a fever, the Department of Health is going to guide us. We are required to call the Department of Health and follow their guidance and so forth and assist in any sort of tracing that may be needed if there is a positive case. So that would be a challenging procedure itself. Again, I just got to the next number, contact tracing. I don't want to stand up here and say I'm going to be an expert in contact tracing, but we are required to assist in that. So for example, if we do have a student or staff or anybody at all that's suspected of COVID, at that point in time, that tracing process will begin. We'll start to prepare that in case it is COVID. And if they announce it's COVID, the Department of Health will decide on what that means. Is there going to be a quarantine for a group of kids? Is there going to be a quarantine for a group of staff members? Is there going to be a large quarantine? Those kinds of things are really going to be guided by our own school physician and the Department of Health. And there will be requirements and clearance from the Department of Health and doctors to allow for the return to school, a negative COVID case or some other way that they have cleared this person from any sort of COVID, suspected COVID, I should say. So it's going to be busy in that sense. I don't know what that's going to look like. I do know we're going to have fevers in the building, so that's going to be interesting. I will say in a bigger school, you suspected COVID cases and tracing might isolate certain areas. We're kind of on the fringe of being small to medium. So, you know, our tracing, how far it would go, would it mean the school automatically closes? I don't know that yet. Would it mean we have a few classes? Would it mean we have a few kids? What I will say is you know, based on what I'm hearing, it wouldn't take very long if there was a positive COVID case to trace pretty far into this building, being that we're fairly small. So again, that'll be interesting how that plays out. But again, it's important to know that once this all happens, we have our primary responsibilities here, and then from there it becomes Department of Health and physicians and so forth to go from there with that. Your return to school after an illness, as I mentioned, is going to be guided by the Department of Health in either a negative COVID test or confirmation in some way by them that you can return to school if this is not a COVID case. Before that, you will not be able to return to school. So the old 24-hour without a fever, don't worry about going to the doctor, is really not going to be the case here. We're not allowed to let you back in. Any closure considerations, for the most part, again, will be guided by the Department of Health in any sort of spread. Obviously, if there's a large closure statewide, you've seen that happen already, that's part of it. But then there could be local closures. The Department of Health might say, you know what, we've traced this too far, just West Canada Valley needs to close right now. And again, those closures are worrisome from us as educators and from an educational perspective. From a decision-making process, not so much, because those aren't going to be superintendent decisions or staff decisions or anything like that. A lot of guidance from them in this case. So the facility, I want to talk a little bit about our facility, where we're at with that. As I mentioned, we had an engineer here with our architect this week. They've done a complete review of our air systems in here. We have done many upgrades to our air systems in our last 2 projects in here. You've heard a lot of the guidance in terms of filters and bringing in more fresh air. Those are all recommendation things we're getting. So drawing in more outside air, windows open when we can, are all going to be big pieces of this. We're going to have to upgrade filters where we typically in the past we have a filter that most schools would use and it would be recommended by our systems. These are going to be enhanced filters that are going to be installed. They're going to be replaced every 6 months based on the recommendations. And again, the fresh air exchange will be the biggest part of that. Obviously, the concerns with fresh air exchanges, that's the most important part, but same token, fresh air exchanges when it's 90 out, brings in a lot of hot air, and fresh air exchanges when it's cold out, brings in a lot of cold air. So the regulation of the temperatures in the rooms will have to be monitored. The guidance is basically as much fresh air as you can bring in to regulate temperatures. We're gonna have drinking water provisions. Water fountains aren't going to happen. They're gonna be all gone. So we're gonna have to create drinking opportunities, either filling stations or drinks, and provide the water in another manner here. Quite honestly, I use this as a reference. You don't see telephone booths much anymore. I don't think you're gonna see drinking fountains around in a traditional manner as much as you'll see anymore as well. Maintaining codes and required ventilation, those are all things that are really directly guided to us by CDC, Department of Health, in our engineers and so forth. So we'll be following the guidance of all of our ventilation in this building. All of our emergency response protocols and drills are going to be required this year, as they always are. And what I'm speaking of here is fire drills, lockdown drills, and emergency type drills that we do in here. The difference being with this one is they're not going to be school-wide. They're going to be isolated. We're going to have to move fire drills around to different wings, so we don't have every class going out and work on their evacuation and so forth in a separate manner. We can't have everybody come to the hall in terms of drills. In terms of lockdowns, we're going to use it more as an educational. This is where we would go. This is the corner we're in. These are the line of sight areas that we're going to deal with and all the procedures we do. So a lot of different, usually we'll do a fire drill that's everybody and we check that box. Now we're going to have to do a whole bunch of different individual or sectionalized drills to try to make sure we meet all the mandates for that. The signage I spoke about several times already. There's going to be signage all over this place. It's all required, especially in areas where we need some bathrooms, hallways, those kinds of things. The cleaning, sanitizing, and disinfecting, our maintenance staff, our cleaning staff, our students, our teachers, our administrators, everybody's going to have to be trained in these kinds of things. We'll have specific schedules set up for all these things. Obviously, the differences between these and cleaning is cleaning of dirt, soap, and water. Sanitizing gets into that, sort of Clorox wipe idea of that, which can't be done when kids are in the room, by the way. And disinfecting, which is more of a time empty building, like disinfecting the building. So there's 3 different levels of cleaning that need to take place. Some are permitted. Cleaning is obviously permitted if students are in the room. The other 2 are not. So we've got to create opportunities for those throughout this. And I keep putting this on for training because there's so much of this that needs to be taught between now and 5.5 weeks when everybody gets into it. Child nutrition. Okay, so cafeteria food. As of right now, since March, we have been receiving federal reimbursements where we've been required to feed everyone. Every person right through the summer here, we've provided remote, we've delivered, and so forth. Those requirements at this point in time are still in place. The catch to it is once we get back, there's no indication that reimbursement program will continue. So although we're required to feed, we still need to be aware that there will be our cash are reduced and our free lunch policies will have to be in place. And we'll have to provide meals obviously to people that are on site, breakfast and lunch, and we'll have to provide meals off-site to anybody breakfast and lunch that's home as a remote learning situation. Our cafeteria design and structure is going to be different. We talked a lot about this in the elementary. We're looking at more of the food being brought, sealed to the classrooms. In classes, we'll talk about classes in a minute. Eating together in their classrooms. We're talking about creating a couple separate areas for the middle school and high school. There won't be tables in there. We're going to be setting up desks that are social distance. So when we do need to use the cafeteria, they're separated in a social distance setting in here. In the cafeteria's design and structure. Again, a lot of planning in place to limit the amount of people in cafeterias and lunch spaces. You're not going to have go down the assembly line and take your stuff out type of things. Things are going to be prepared. There'll be maybe a couple of options and go from there with that. I mentioned the financials and free. It's really important that everybody continue to complete their free and reduced forms. I know right now it's been under a different program, but once we get to the fall, right now we have to plan for the traditional form of our lunch. So those of you that are listening that are free and reduced, We're going to need those forms completed, get them in so that we're all set for September and so forth. In the cafeteria. So transportation, that's, as you've read a lot or watched on TV, is a complicated piece of this puzzle here. A lot of restrictions on our buses. So right now, we have 22 seats on our buses. So on our large, that's your maximum number of kids that you will have on the bus at that time, 22. There will be situations where we can have up to 28 students on that bus, and that is if there are some siblings who can sit together on that bus. So if you have a brother and sister, two sisters, two brothers, whatever, they are permitted to sit in the same seat together, which would expand the number a little bit. But really, at the end of the day, the maximum we're looking at in terms of our guidance is 28. So we're looking at anywhere from 22 to 28 kids on the large buses. So with that being said, depending on our numbers that are looking at transporting their own children versus using the district transportation, that's going to kind of determine the routing and the amount of times we need to go back and forth to pick kids up. So the design of the routes based on those numbers is going to be a big part of our August planning on how we're going to go about doing that. And that's a big factor along with the temperature checks and so forth of the rolling entrances. We're going to need time in the morning to roll in those entrances and get all of this taken care of before we start the educational process. PPE, as I mentioned, all kids, all bus drivers, everybody has to wear a mask on the bus the whole time, regardless of wanting a seat and all that. So if your child is going to be wearing, or if your child is going to be riding the bus, they will need to be prepared to wear a mask on the bus for the entire duration of the ride. Bus protocols for reported cases. This question comes up a lot. You know, how does the bus factor into COVID-19? Well, it could be a major factor. It could be everybody on that bus is a portion of getting traced. It could be a classroom issue, and we trace it back to the bus that they rode in on. So the buses and the protocols in that are in place. There's clear guidance on that. In fact, if we do have a positive case, we may have to take a bus off the road for a little bit until we can get that cleared to get back on the road with a positive COVID case. So there's a number of regulations in terms of our bus protocols if a case is positive in this situation. I mentioned the students on the transportation, the 22 to 28 max on our large buses. We're going to have to adapt to that. The arrival and dismissals are going to have to be what I call rolling. So where we normally said the bell rang and we all went out to the buses or we lined them up, that's not going to be the case. We're going to have to create staggered kind of dismissals, get them on buses. We may have some buses that are going to go out and then need to come back, pick some more kids up. So, you know, we're looking at 30 minutes to 45 minutes on the front side and the back side to get all of that stuff done and get kids home at their normal time. Training, again, I keep putting up, you know, the training of the transportation staff, the cleaning and disinfecting, the training that goes along and what our process for those requirements once a day, but we're going to try to do some cleaning and disinfecting in between as many runs as we can where it's feasible to get things situated. Transportation, communication, and changes. This is a big deal right now. Last year, we asked you to fill out a form where we were going to be picking you up and dropping you off. That process is going to be in place again this year. To a certain extent, this is going to be even more enhanced. It's going to be very, very challenging to adapt to changes on a regular basis. And we're not talking about emergency changes. We're talking about changes. And the reason that's going to be difficult is we're going to design runs that are going to maximize the seating on that bus. So if buses change and people go on different buses, we may not have a seat for them. So if we're maxed out at 22, we've got to figure out another way to get the child home. Not that we can't do that, not that we can't adapt, not that we can't adjust to things, but understand that's going to be a little bit more challenging for us if those situations arise. Where before we might have just had simply space on a bus to put somebody. Routing, we talked about that a little bit. The routing and the determination of routing will be different this year just based on the sheer numbers and the amount of kids we have and what areas those kids are coming from. Loading and unloading, there's some clear guidance on that, although we'll see how this all plays out. I mean, I'll give you an example. The guidance is the first kids on the bus head to the back and you fill the bus from back to front, and you dismiss from front to back on the bus, maintaining social distancing. When we release them off the bus, because we have to maintain social distancing in front of the school, we can temperature check them. We're going to be dismissing like one bus at a time. Hopefully we're going to have buses coming in at staggered times. We're going to have to hold kids and get them on there so that we can, create situations where social distancing can be maintained. So that'll all be involved with the design, the loading, unloading, and so forth. BOCES transportation, like it has been, will be direct home to BOCES and back home. All of that will be provided to them, and I'll get into BOCES discussions as we move forward. Social emotional well-being is the next category. So obviously this is an important issue for schools. It's an important issue for communities. An important issue for the region. And this COVID pandemic has only enhanced that. The impact of that is unknown at this time. We are creating a social emotional task force here, which involves our building administrators, our school psychologists, our social worker, our counselors who will be involved in designing a program that is prepared to address the needs of our staff, our students, and our community in this process. We'll be using many of our regional partners to assist us in this. There's a number of support groups that are outside here and support agencies that we use often for this. We have no way of knowing the emotional impact this has had on the quarantine with families, people, kids since they've been out of school, what life has been like for everybody at this point in time. It's been different for everybody, I'm sure. So we need to assess that pretty quickly to see where we're at. We need to know the social emotional health of the kids here. We need to be prepared to address that as well. And we need to file mental health professional guidance. So, these regional partners and our evaluation systems of our kids and their well-being is going to be a key component of everything. All right. So the important part that people are waiting to hear. We've had a lot of discussion about this as we created this draft plan. Again, we're still continuing to seek some input on our plan. As we went through all the different stakeholders, the surveys, and the input of everybody, we looked at what we could accommodate, what we couldn't accommodate, what was required to be accommodated, what was in the best interest of health and safety, and all the different pieces of this. Along the SED guidance that basically highlights a couple of areas. One, that we create an opportunity for in-person instruction. Two, that we focus on younger children, elementary and special needs students, especially for in-person settings whenever possible. And then develop a plan with our facilities that we have, our staff that we have, and our feasibility to get this all done. So with that being said, we've come up with 3 options that we think we can make work in the district at this point in time. The first option will be, for parents and guardians, will be the full-day option, the in-person schedule, which means you will arrive here. We'll talk about specifics in a little bit, but you'll arrive here essentially the way you would every single day. Right? So there will be an option for our parents to choose the everyday option here at West Canada for their elementary students. Right? The general time frame that we're working with, again, is our 9 to 3:30, like always. We are also creating an opportunity for a hybrid half day of in-person in the morning and some remote learning in the PM. Again, that schedule would be 9 to 12. The added variable to that would be a midday run to return those half-day kids to their homes or to their destination at midday. Again, this was put in place out of some of the information we're getting from the community in terms of, whether under the systems and the conditions of what we're doing here, their children could be here all day long and fit into a system that's not really true elementary like we know. So we wanted to be sensitive to that thought, where we could create maybe programming where they could get a good deal of in-person instruction in the morning, and then create programs for remote learning in the PM. And then we also have the option of the full-day remote learning, which would create an option of direct structured learning, just like you're in school, but it would be done through the devices and through in-person instruction through those devices. So I'll talk in detail a little bit more about those 3 options, but we have, at this point in time, offering up a plan of 3 different options for parents and guardians that are out there at the elementary level. If you look at the note that's on the bottom of this, the drop-off of bus transportation for in-person will occur all the way from 8:30 to 9:15. As I talked about with transportation, we're going to need about 30 to 45 minutes to create a drop-off situation where we can social distance children, We're going to have to create timeframes where we may need to do multiple bus runs and pick kids here, depending on the number of in-person students we have. And we've got to go a step further than that and know that we've got a temperature check and a breakfast before we can even get started with the education. Pickup and bus transportation will occur in the afternoon for elementary between 3 and 3:30. Again, we'll designate pickup areas and drop-off areas. For the elementary right now, it looks like the bus drop-off will be the same, and the parent drop-off will be the same as we've done in the past. If we get into a situation where the parent drop-off situation is a little bit too clogged up there, then we may have to adjust the situations with that. But we're anticipating keeping as much the same there for the elementary. So some details of the instructional days as I've discussed. Again, this is elementary right now. 8:30 to 9:15, what you would see here is student arrival, temperature checks, breakfast, and the student survey if they were checked at home and completed. This would be done on their computer device that would be provided to them. From 9:15 to 12 will be predominantly core subject instruction. ELA, math, some social, some science, and added all into all that kind of stuff. That would be the core instruction to the best of our ability during that time. At noon, or approximately leading up to noon, the half-day option students would dismiss with the takeout prepared lunch for them at that point in time, and they would be brought home for remote instruction at that point in time. From 12 to 3 would be our small group instruction, our special area instruction, our remote instruction. All of that would take place, and then from 3 to 3:30 would be the dismissal for all the full-day students at that point in time. A couple important notes that I want to go through with this. Parents and guardians will be able to choose one of the 3 options for the first 10 weeks, which is November, and commit to that option. It's important that we get some commitment after we know exactly what the plans are from our parents, because we're designing space, transportation, remote learning assignments, and so forth. And I probably have this a little bit later in the presentation, but I want to talk directly about this. When we talk about these 3 plans, you will have a structured schedule during that time frame during the day. So if you are a remote student, you will have a West Canada teacher on a regular schedule who will be teaching in front of you on that computer screen, and you will have designated times of attendance taken during that. It won't be simply putting work up and you're working on it at your convenience. So those parents that choose that remote option need to have their own situation in place and be able to fulfill that obligation of being in school but not being in school, being able to work on a computer, work with a teacher, be part of discussions with that teacher, and move forward. And again, a lot of the staffing and the structure of this will be determined by our numbers. How many people are hybrid in terms of half day, how many people are full day students in person, and how many students end up being full day remote. So we're going to need to have some defined numbers in this. We understand, though, at some point in time, you're going to make a choice. There could be changes, there could be opportunities. There could be mandated changes where this all changes throughout the school year. Keep that in mind. Right now, we're just talking about where we're at on July 30th, where we might be on July 31st. So, we're asking for a commitment in the first 10 weeks of your decision, and then we'll look to evaluate that if adjustments are needed. Parents and guardians will be provided with all the requirements for each option, and the students must be able to fulfill those requirements. Signed forms will be developed. So whatever option you are taking, you will have a form that will have all the assurances that you're able to fulfill those obligations under that, especially for the hybrid and the remote options. When you choose that remote option, we're going to create a structured schedule where at 9:15, you are going to be in class potentially at that point in time with your teacher on that screen, wherever that designated space is at home. So there's going to be, some assertions by parents, guardians, and children if they're able to do that. Each option will be structured with a defined schedule during the normal school day. Attendance will be taken, as it always is, through our data systems. So when we have remote instruction, if you're not there for remote instruction, you're absent just like you are if you're absent from school. If your child has 100-degree temperature or higher and or displays symptoms of COVID-19, they will be monitored in an isolation room. First they'll be sent there, then they'll be monitored until you're able to pick them up, and the Department of Health, as I mentioned, will guide the process from there. So if we have a 102, we'll say we sent home, we'll give them all the information, and the Department of Health and school physicians and your physicians will guide the rest of that process. your child may be required by the Department of Health to quarantine, and there may be other children that are required to quarantine under this process. So some other important information for our elementary. I'll start with the first. Students must be temperature checked and evaluated at home prior to getting on the bus in the morning. I had a question sent to me about whether the temperature checks are before the bus. Now, the temperature check before the bus is at home. So the expectation is that you have fulfilled as parents, you've checked for symptoms, you've checked temperatures, and you are saying your child is in good health to go to school that day. Once they get off that bus, though, they will be temperature checked before they're allowed into the facility. So, this partnership between home and here is really important. Obviously, we don't want to have too many 100+ temperatures once they get to school. We're hoping that gets taken care of before they get on the bus or brought to school in the morning. As I mentioned, students will be temperature checked daily upon arrival. Students will wear masks with the exception of defined mask breaks. So expect your children to be wearing masks most of the day. There will be certainly times where the mask will be off. There will be designed mask breaks. There'll be designated and required mask breaks. But the true piece of this is it's going to be challenging to maintain 6-foot distances all the time, which means masks are going to need to be worn. Students will be social distanced at all times, or when feasible, students will be placed in cohorts. This is a term that you're going to hear a lot of. One of the designations that we've had, or one of the requirements, or tasks, I should say, that we've been assigned is to try to create as many cohort group situations where the same group of kids are together all the time. And that is really related to spread and tracing and so forth. So if we can keep kids contained with their same cohort of groups for most of the scheduled day, a little bit easier in the elementary than it is when we get to the 9 to 12 level. The more we can keep that tracing level down, the more we can limit any potential spread of things that are going on. So we're working on that in terms of class assignments, teacher assignments, class schedules, and so forth. As we look at what the school is going to look like, students will be near or at their desk a lot of the time, or majority of the time during the day. They'll be social distance most of the time. Students will eat in their classrooms, and food will be delivered to those classrooms. It won't be full. Everybody down at the cafeteria. Recess will be limited to strict guidelines. Only certain groups will be out there. They'll have to social distance. We'll have to disinfect the playground and do these kinds of things along the way. There won't be large recess areas going on. Special area instructions, music, art, PE, etc. will have to be redesigned at times for classroom instruction. Music and PE have to be 12 feet apart right now. So when the weather's good and we get outside, we may be able to do some things, but we need to be prepared for some classroom instruction that goes along with these where our special area teachers might even be pushing into those rooms of the regular classroom. Google Classroom, those of you that are in here have kind of got familiar with it, hopefully a little bit in March if we had kids in the district. That will be the required platform for K-12 for all students and staff. So it will be universal. Any other resources that are used by the instructor for that class will be connected with Google Classroom, but the main sign-in platform for any sort of remote instruction and even in-person instruction is going to be through Google Classroom. Google Meets will be required, which is the actual live interaction teachers. That is an aspect of Google Classroom, which we use quite a bit during the closure. Again, a lot of information. Hopefully you're following. There'll be plenty of time to discuss this and ask questions at the end. Hopefully I can get through all that. So let's talk about middle school, high school education. One of the things that we clearly found when we looked at middle school, high school is at this time, depending on the number of people who choose options and how many kids we have here, we see this as we're not going to have the ability, as you'll see with most schools around here, to have every 7 to 12 kid here every single day in person. So we have had to create a system basically that creates a hybrid option along with the full remote option. So the hybrid option that we have developed at this point is every other day in-person remote learning. So bottom line is students will be scheduled into an A-B type schedule. If you're an A schedule, you come on Monday, B's come on Tuesday, A's come back on Wednesday. The day in between, you are involved in remote instruction, and you will have some days 3 days in person. The opposite week, you'll have 2 days in person. It'll rotate in that manner. Again, we're going to cohort kids. We're going to try to cohort siblings so that the same families are going to schools on the same days with this, even though it's high school students. And we're going to create live remote instruction for the students at home on the day they're not here. Again, this is really dictated by spacing. This is dictated by busing. This is dictated by a number of different things in terms of the numbers we have in high school at this point. The other option that parents will have, just like the elementary, is the full remote learning, which is 100% remote learning. And the scheduled instructional time for both options is our regular schedule, 7 to 2:30. So those that are in the remote learning option that we have will be on their schedule. They'll just be on their computer at home. So instead of sitting at a desk in their room, period 1, they may be on that class, English 7 or whatever that might be. So that's the only difference. It won't be an open schedule for them to work as they need. They need to commit to 7:30 to 2:30, just like they would if they were here. So as we get into the instructional day of the middle school and high school, as I mentioned, 7:30 to 8:15 is the period of time that we're looking at for student arrival. Again, buses coming, bringing kids in throughout that time period, temperature checks, breakfast, and the student survey. We have no idea how long this is going to take until we get the numbers. We're plugging in 45 minutes of essentially study hall or homeroom time so the kids can roll in during that entire time. And then the instructional period schedule would begin at 8:15. So the instructional schedule for both options, the hybrid and the full, would include lunch periods that are plugged into the schedule. And I mentioned we might do that style cafeteria options for them. Student dismissal, again, would need to be rolling. We're looking at 1:45 to 2:30 of a rolling dismissal at the end of the day. Again, this will depend on numbers and how many kids we can get on buses, how many kids are riding buses. Any opportunity to shrink the arrival or shrink the dismissal time will just only expand our educational time in the middle of the day. So we're looking at worst case scenario right now. We're hoping to pick up some minutes and some different things along the way. Parents and guardians, again, will choose one of the two options for the first 10 weeks leading up to November and commit to that option. All students will be assigned to a teacher at West Canada Valley regardless of their choice. So your schedule that you get, even if you're 100% remote, will be your schedule. Period 3, you will have the teacher you would have period 3 if you were here. The difference being you won't be sitting at a desk, you'll be sitting at your computer interacting through that piece. Parents and guardians will be provided with requirements for each option, and the student must be able to fulfill those requirements. That's a key piece that I want to stress for both elementary parents and guardians and for high school, middle school, high school. If you are choosing the remote option, if you have health reasons, if you're fearful of return, if you're whatever it might be that you're choosing that remote option, you have got to be able to fulfill the obligations that are required. So you need to be able to fulfill that schedule during the day to do that. You need to be able to handle the technology. And we'll do our best to train you and make sure that we have things in place. But that's a key piece of that. Otherwise, you're going to run into quality of education issues, you're going to run into attendance issues, and that's going to create a problem right off the bat. And at that point in time, if we see that as a problem, administration is going to have some discussions and communications with that parent, guardian, and student to see if maybe remote's a good option for them. Each option, again, will be structured, defined schedule during the normal school day with the assigned teacher. Attendance will be taken daily as required by the state education department. And again, the same requirements stand for the high school, middle school, high school. Under temperature or symptoms, you're going to be sent to the isolation room, and then the Department of Health is going to be involved in that process. So I certainly encourage you to do those temperature checks. I'm supposed to say you're required to do that. You need to do that and take care of that before they get to school, because once they get to school with that, we've got safety issues, obviously, and the process starts with the Department of Health. Your child may be required to quarantine, again, along with other children that may be impacted by the tracing. So important information for the middle school, high school. Students will be temperature checked upon their arrival every day. They will wear masks with the exception of defined mask breaks, as stated during the elementary portion. Students will be social distanced. Our desks are all going to be 6 feet apart. We're going to use larger spaces in the building where we can if we need larger groups. Students will be in one cohort when feasible. 7th and 8th grade especially will be almost elementary style, where you'll be with your class of 7th graders, your group of kids in 8th grade. so forth. And we're going to move from schedules or with that group of kids to limit the amount of contact with a number of people. 9 through 12, that becomes a little more complicated, although we're working on a number of things. I don't envision a bell schedule here. I envision periods where they're transitioning. So I envision that happening, where feasible in the 9 through 12, although we do have a lot of mixed grade levels in certain classes. So it's not as easy in 9 through 12, but we've got to try. The structured transition between periods is important. We can't have all the kids in the hall at one time, so we've got to create situations where we can, if we are moving kids from a different classroom, then we're able to stagger that a little bit. Students will have structured lunch times, and social distancing will be applied during that time, especially because you obviously won't have the mask on. There are no lockers right now. Students are permitted to be using lockers or be next to people in lockers at this point. Again, if these things change, we'll certainly adapt to those. There's no locker rooms. The locker rooms will be closed. That creates issues for PE, obviously. We won't be able to change for PE. Our program and what we're doing in PE, we'll have to look at that aspect of it. We may have to have kids somewhat prepared to do some sort of PE activity. Again, we'll be currently outside portions of this. I didn't mention this on here, but music, art, home and careers, where we have a lot of hands-on technology, those curriculums and what we're using and shared equipment, tools, those kinds of things, all have to be adapted under the current conditions. Music, as we know it, we won't have full bands at this point in time, choruses. They can't all be together. They got to be 12 feet apart during this time. So we're looking at more of an instructional, learn to play the instruments, do some virtual playing that we can stream out at times. At this point in time, I don't see this auditorium being filled at all. There's not going to be, concerts in that sense. There's no, I didn't say this during this, there's no morning program at this point. We can't let visitors and not rolling all the kids into the cafeteria. That's not happening. I've used the reference before that this is like school. You're going to school, you're in the class, you're going to be distanced, you're going to be taught, and there's not a lot of extra stuff right now. It's sad for me to say that. It's not fun to create a plan like this, but it is what it is right now. And I think it's important that after we end this presentation tonight, everybody knows this isn't school in person as you know it's school in person. There are a lot of regulations in place here. Extracurricular activities, as you may have heard, are suspended through, at this point, September 21st. I include all extracurricular activities, although the focus is on athletics at this point in time, with the most recent statewide announcement. I'll get to a little more detail of that later on, but it's important to note that right now there are no extracurricular activities permitted. There's going to be no defined study halls. Your schedule is going to be shrunk down, so you're going to have specific areas. We will have to create situations where we can have people who aren't in class and we can social distance them. You're sitting in a room in the auditorium that provides some opportunity for social distancing if there's a class not going on. And I've talked to the teachers about this already. The books, and textbooks, and things like that. A lot of kids carrying their stuff around with them anyway, but in the same sense, we need to become a lot more digital even when we're here. So a lot of our assignments and work are going to be done through the devices that these kids will have, so that there isn't those exchanges of papers and needs from lockers and so forth. Which gets me to the technology and connectivity portion of this. One of the important things that we've been planning for, which is going to help us during this time, is our one-to-one device program. Because of where we're at with our one-to-one device and the plans that we put in place leading up to this point, all of our students and staff will be provided with their own one-to-one device in the building. We have the infrastructure to do that right now. That they'll use for both in-person instruction and the remote instruction. The device will be either a Chromebook or an iPad. The younger students in grades K through 2, K through 3 will be iPad-based. Everybody else in either 3 through 12 or 4 through 12 will be Chromebook-based. And they will have their own, which they will have here. They will be able to bring home to utilize in both spots. I envision a lot of Chromebook use in the classroom itself. We're looking at our infrastructure and building because so much technology used in the school itself as well, make sure that we're able to handle all of those things in the building. Connectivity assistance and accommodations will be provided to anyone who has the issue. We're required to, as a priority, to create digital equity. That's not easy here. We all know the rural area that we live in, and some of the bad spots and the areas that the connectivity isn't as great. We did that. We surveyed parents. We'll continue to survey parents to make sure that they have the connectivity they need. We've created hotspot situations. We work with Elena Boylan and Morik. They're coming up with some even better ideas in terms of hotspots and opportunities to get connectivity. But we've got to do everything we can for people to get them the digital equity that everyone else has. As I mentioned, Google Classroom will be utilized K-12 in all classrooms for consistency. Google Classroom will be used for in-person instruction as well as to develop further comfort levels. That's important because when they have them here in front of them, the students are here, even if they're in the every other day, the more we can work with them on the Google Classroom, the more they're independently able to function through that system when they are at home. So that device is going to be an important part of our instructional planning. Staff training has been going on since this closure. It continues. This is the most staff training we've ever done with remote learning, with the classroom, ways to change the way they do use their resources and instruction, and Google Meets, and small group instructions. These online devices create so many different opportunities that are there. It's kind of like the car you buy where it's got all these features and you don't even use them all. These sites like Google Classroom have so many different opportunities that we just need to make sure that we get people trained to use them. Google Meets will be required as an aspect of Google Classroom, and assurances will be required by parents and guardians as we distribute these one-on-one devices. Very similar to calculators and other things that we give to kids as part of their educational program. So career and technical education, CTE and VP Tech. Have some questions on this already. Again, these are regional programs that I'm working with other people on, so I'm going to give you the information as I have it now. Again, anything we talk about today is certainly subject to change, either at a state level, a regional level, local level. I don't anticipate not having to make adjustments to different things. But again, we've got to create some structure here, and that's what we're doing. VP Tech students will meet in person Monday through Friday on a normal schedule. So for those students that we have that are enrolled in the VP Tech program, they will be picked up at home, taken to BOCES, picked up at BOCES, and taken to home on Monday through Friday in-person schedule, as I know it right now. Your college classes, if you're involved with college classes where you used to maybe go up to HCCC for the class portion or the college portion, those instructors from the college are going to come to BOCES to do the instruction there. So you'll be in two spots, home and BOCES for that. Your PE requirement, which some of you met here in the district before we put you on a bus, that'll be taken care of now down at BOCES because you won't be here in the morning at that point. So that will be the one change that some of you will see that are VP Tech students. CTE, at this point in time, we'll be meeting in a 2-day in-person schedule at BOCES. The remaining scheduled classes for CTE students, who are typically half-day students, and support services with them will be provided by our district here. Juniors right now will be attending BOCES full day on Monday and Tuesday, and seniors will attend BOCES full day on Thursday and Friday. The remaining 3 days will be the remote instruction piece of CTE and all the classes requirements that West Canada Valley will provide here. Right now, those schedules are being developed by Mr. Broadbent's guidance department. We are anticipating that being in person here during the other days that they're not there. Transportation, as always, will be provided directly from home to BOCES, similar to what we're going to do in this car. So no changes. So I mentioned this earlier, athletics, extracurricular activities. Right now, statewide, they are postponed through September 21st, where they will be reviewed again at the state level. There is a possibility that fall sports would begin at that point in time in September and continue through the fall with a later start date for winter. There is also a very strong possibility, and I say that, looking at where we are and where we're going, that the state may decide to postpone again through January, and with 3 seasons scheduled through June, beginning with winter sports. So if that postponement happens on paper, the winter sports would begin in January. The fall sports would overlap with that in the spring, And then as we approach the end of the year, the spring sports will be played, all in overlapping short seasons. We already know at this point the state tournaments and regional tournaments have already been canceled for the fall. Everything will be section based right now, even if we do open on the 21st. There is no fitness center or organized team activities at this time permitted with our coaches and our systems. The outside facilities are open, but we are not permitted to hold any sort of practices or anything like that. And again, I wrote this on here because I anticipate a lot of updates on athletics and extracurriculars as we move forward here. You see that nationwide just with professional college sports. So special education and English language learners, again, these are key components of our plan and how we're going to address that. Again, we are required, no matter what model we choose or what model the parents or guardians choose, to create equity and access for all of our special needs students. That won't change for our kids here. We will provide it in the most feasible possible way that we can, including their support services that they receive on their IEPs. Meaningful parent engagement. These are all things that should be included all the time, but the parent engagement and the communication with parents is going to be, the collaboration with parents is going to be extremely important as we work through special ed and the needs of each individual student that has that identification. Documentation will continue to be recorded like it always is. All of the guidance that we receive with special education continues. We're required to meet those requirements. So in terms of special education, we may have a little bit of a different structure in here, but our full intention is to meet all of the requirements in that IEP. World language instruction, our students, where English is a second language, all of that will continue. We have those programs in place through BOCES, where we have people support students who English is not their native language. All that continued support will happen, and our continued work that we've had in this district toward our students that are working toward the CLI literacy will continue as well. Before, I just want to talk a little bit about regional special education programs as well. I didn't put that on the PowerPoint because we don't have all the details, but as of right now, we anticipate all of our BOCES placed full day special education students to be Monday through Friday in person at this point in time. We haven't heard any different at this point. If we do, we'll certainly be notifying those parents of students that are attending BOCES for special education services on a full day basis. But as of right now, we anticipate that as well as we detect Friday. So staffing. Questions about staffing. I've talked a little bit about the staffing and the teaching and the instructional work here. This is just a little bit of clarification. In the absence of any medical or legal documentation, all staff will be present in the building during normal work hours for both remote and in-person assignments. So depending on what their assignments are for any of these, those assignments will take place from this building, unless there are legal and medical reasons for them not to be here, which are to be determined, or unless there's a school-wide closure, like we had from March till June. So those events would create remote learning in a different setting from home, but as long as the school is able to be open, our staff will be here as well. Each student, regardless of their educational option, will have a structured schedule and a certified instructor. I want you to know that as you're thinking your options through. We're going to provide you with an instructor. You're going to have live interactive discussions with them in most of our cases. We may have some unique cases where we have to design some unique options for certain kids under certain circumstances, but the overall plan involves educational options, both remote and in person, where you have certified instructors. Schedules, again, will be structured during the normal educational day, and daily attendance will be required regardless of the option you choose. Attendance will be tracked by the instructor through our data management system, just as if we were here full time. Our parent portal will be active like it always is. And teachers will be required to keep updates on the parent portal of student progress and so forth. Students will be placed in cohorts for staff whenever feasible. I talked a little bit about that. As much grouping as we can do with kids to keep the interchange and tracing down what we can do. And staff will be present in the morning and at the end for the rolling arrivals and dismissals. So, a lot of material, what's next? So the reopening framework plan that we're discussing tonight at this point is required to be submitted tomorrow, July 31st. This is not an approval document by any means because they are just simply looking to see what our plans may be at this point in time. Understanding that this plan will be changed, tweaked, adjusted depending on regulation and mandates that happen. And I can't stress this enough. A lot can happen between now and September. We're over 5 weeks away from school. You see what's going on in the media, the state. One of the things I've told the groups around here is one of the biggest events that I think people are going to pay attention to is because we're in the Northeast, we start a little bit later than everybody else. So we're going to watch the entire country open up south of us, basically, and we're going to see how this plays out. If it plays out in a positive way, and it seems like the openings are safe, I think we can anticipate, the opportunity to try to open safely ourselves. If things don't go well nationwide with these new openings, I can certainly envision changes to what's going on and changes to what I'm talking about tonight. So, we're going to continue to keep this communicated the best we can. We're at the mercy of a lot of things that are going on as well. And we're certainly trying to do the best we can to take into consideration the parents and guardians, students, and everybody here along with what's going on both state and nationwide. As mentioned, this is a living document that will become more detailed and change with regulations. There's going to be negotiated terms with employee unions, where terms of employment may be impacted by our plans that we're talking about. There's very specific changes and things that are going on that will have to be discussed with our unions. Provide parents and guardians with a detailed summary for drop-offs and pickup times, student schedules, elementary class assignments, transportation assurances, and the required insurances for educational options chosen. I'm giving you an overview tonight of these things. At some point in the next few weeks, you're going to have details of these things. These are the things that I'm sure, as you make your choices, you really care about at this point. Where do I drop my kid off? What time are they going to get picked up? How's lunch going to work? What's the PPE? What are the safety procedures? What's the day going to look like? Who's in the class? How many kids? Those kinds of questions will all be defined in the upcoming weeks. Develop health and safety training schedules and protocols. There's to return to school. I've mentioned this. We have a number of assurances and mandates that need to take place for everybody in this building, staff, students, parents, guardians, everybody that has any function in our educational community needs to be trained on all the schedules, protocols, etc. Prepare the facility for in-person instruction under the current regulations. I talked a lot about that. We've got to get this facility ready with signage and classrooms and storage of things we can't have there. All these things, that 5 weeks is not a lot of time to do that part. It's a lot of time for changes with virus, but it's not a lot of time to prepare. And again, over the next few weeks, continue to define the reopening plan as we gather more and more information. So at this point in time, I thank you for your patience as I went through all of those different items in different areas. Those areas that I went through are all the requirements that are going to be in that detailed plan that needs to be submitted to the Department of Health for review and the State Education Department for review. That needs to be posted on our website for people to view the entire plan. Right now, the document on the plan of that is 40 pages long, plus with all the overview of what I've given you and the assertions that need to be placed into that in all plans there. So again, that's where we're at this point in time. I certainly know I threw a ton of information at members of the board tonight. I want to thank everybody that's helped in this process and developing it, and the parents and guardians, and the surveys, and the input, and the groups that have come in to meet and so forth to help develop that draft and those sort of ideas. So at this point in time, I'd like to turn this over to members of the board for questions, comments, concerns, different ideas on plans, and so forth.
I have a question.
Yes, Mr. Barber.
A lot of kids are home alone in the morning. How does a parent keep their temperature? Parents are gone.
So in terms,
own temperature.
yeah, so we're going to have to deal with probably some individual situations with parents that have issues with being able to do that temperature check in the morning. So if a parent in most cases with our elementary students, I would hope, in most cases, the kids are home alone. You know, maybe as they get to the upper end of it, it could happen first period. But I would hope there would be a period for them to be able to do that in most cases. And for those individual situations where they can't, you know, can we come up with a plan with them to help them with that plan? But it is a requirement. It's not really a West Canada requirement. So it's a requirement that we have to make. So we're gonna have to work with people. Sure. Other questions, comments on?
Are they going to have proof that they've checked their child at home?
Yeah, so the only way to have proof of that is the survey that will be submitted that says, yes, I checked my child. I had my child fulfills the obligation of checking their temperature at home and they haven't been in contact. But to answer your question, yeah, there's going to be some trust in that gets done in the morning. And then again, as I mentioned, we're also going to be temperature checking as they get to the building. So it's not going to be, you know, I'm not saying it couldn't happen, but if you walk to the building and your temperature is 102, I'm pretty sure it was 102. You know, and if we use Tylenol or Advil or something to get that down in the morning to get them here, at some point in the day, there's no more Advil, and that temperature is going to go back up again at that point. So this is really a partnership, and I'm hoping that everybody is at home is going to take this part of it seriously. It's really to everyone's benefit for safety reasons, for protocol reasons, a whole bunch of different things here to make sure that your child is not having any symptoms or temperatures before they enter that bus. You know, we're relying on everybody for the safety of the other kids, and we're relying on you to help us in that screening process in the morning before that happens. You know, and we'll offer that second layer once they get to the building to make sure that we feel that the student is safe to come to the building as well.
Have the teachers been introduced to this program?
So the question by Mr. Gage is if the teacher's been introduced to this program. The teachers have been involved with the input of this. They've been involved with different ideas the schedule will work. They've offered input on what they think the schedule should be, and we've taken that input and put it into a plan. The building principals have discussed these options with the teachers and discussed the potential options that will be offered at this point in time, but there'll be a great deal more discussion going forward.
Are other schools allowing options for the parents to choose, or is it just you?
So the question from Mrs. Michael is, are other schools providing the options for students to choose? Every district in this situation is a little bit different. What you're going to see is a lot of the larger schools are getting into a situation where they're keeping full remote for their high school students. The reason for that is because they need space. The ability to, if the regulation says we need to focus on elementary and special needs students, they need space and facility space. So you're going to see a lot of the larger school districts using the remote approach, especially for the high schools. The smaller schools, ones that are smaller than us, potentially could have some different numbers and different options for their students. There are other schools that are at this point in time not declaring a remote option for their parent. There's definitely schools in the area that aren't going that route right now. I can't speak for them. I'm not sure where that'll go for them, if I'm saying it that way. I think there is a strong push at the state level right now for parents and guardians that, in the absence of a vaccination, the absence of knowing what this virus is, to be able to choose remote options. So I do think there will be schools that won't offer that option, but we'll see how that goes for them.
And then for the cleaning for the day, are you going to be able to do the cleaning and upkeep during the day with the custodial staff you currently have? Or are you going to have more people? Because I know that you would kind of like rotate your people through. Are you going to be able to?
Yeah. So the question by Ms. Michael is the cleaning staff during the day, are we able to rotate people through? We are developing those schedules right now to create a cleaning and disinfecting schedule, especially in the areas that are required for more often disinfecting. At this point in time, as we develop those schedules, we're gonna have to look closely at who's working at what time schedules, overlapping schedules. If you're asking about increasing staff, obviously that's something that's, sort of a last resort, especially where we're at this point in time. But if we need to, for the safety, health and safety of the building, we need to look at that. We certainly would have to look at additional help with that.
The teacher's gonna have to do that.
So,
You know, because if you can't use the chemicals and things with the children in the room, you know what I'm saying, throughout the day.
so the requirement for all of this is once a day. Okay, so that's, you know, obviously if we're able to do it at different times during the day, we want to do that. You know, I can't say that the teachers are going to do that by any means at this point. Certain levels, as you mentioned, aren't able to go that way. Certain levels, you know, we can do cleaning, but when we get into that sanitizing and disinfecting, it's got to be at times when kids aren't in the room. And they're not going to be moving much. So, you know, a lot of the sanitizing and disinfecting of a classroom space may not happen much during the day, especially if the kids are there consistently.
What about the buses? Once they drop the kids off, they have to be cleaned before they go back out.
Yeah, so we're, again, the regulation, that's the one thing, we've had a lot of discussion. So when you read through CDC and Department of Health, they're setting minimum standards and so forth. So we have to clean them once a day. So essentially at the end of the day, we clean and reset, but we're gonna do more than that. It's gonna be, we won't have time to do it between every single run, but we will be able to do it between maybe the morning run and the midday run and the late runs and so forth. So anytime we get an open space in between to do those things and clean them, we're going to. And where it's not feasible, where we've got a back-to-back run, you know, maybe we're bringing 22 kids in and going back and getting another 22 kids and bringing them in. It may not be feasible to do that whole thing out there. Again, we're going to look at processes and ways to do that, but there's certainly going to be times where it's just not going to be feasible to do that. Other questions, thoughts on the planning?
Question about sports.
Yes.
So you said potentially sports could start September 21st. If they choose the full remote, they would come back till mid-November potentially, so they will not be able to play in sports.
So the extracurricular and athletics, we've had a lot of discussion about that. You know, we need to plan for that, but we also need to plan for the reopening piece of this first, knowing that that's going to be September 21st at the earliest. So the question is by Mrs. Bartlett, if someone were to choose a remote option to start the year, and sports were to happen on September 21st, and the evaluation of that change wouldn't happen until November, you know, would that student be able to participate in extracurricular activities? I can't answer that question right now. I don't know what the regulations will be with that. There may be a requirement to provide access to things even if they choose the remote option. Some of that may be dictated. If it's not, then that would have to be a discussion item. And certainly, we wouldn't want to necessarily discriminate, you know, a kid from being able to do that if they choose to. Understanding that if you're choosing the remote option, I'm assuming that is for safety reasons, and those safety concerns will still be there, I think, on the athletic competition that day too as well. So, you know, that's a discussion item that I'm not really prepared to answer at this point in time. Other questions, comments on any of these categories? Discussion, ideas, disagreements.
What do you consider to be a negotiating issue? To the
So-
contract?
Yeah, so the question by Mr. Kemmler is,
They're on time.
the question by Mr. Kemmler is what is considered to be a negotiated item with unions or the impact on terms and conditions of employment. That's a question that I can't answer clearly because the unions themselves would have to define why they feel that's impacted by anything that I've talked about tonight. So if there was a condition or something that I was asking them that was not in the contractual bargaining agreement or impacted their bargaining agreement in any way, that would have to be negotiated. As you know, with the perspective and the perception of what would need to be negotiated is a discussion item between our own legal and our own in the negotiating team. So that's my answer to that right now. At this point in time, I feel we've created a plan that's within the bargaining unit, contract negotiations.
So a high school teacher, for instance, is 7:30 to 2:30, 7 hours. They're still gonna be here 7 hours.
Yeah, so the question was the schedule for example, a high school teacher by Mr. Marco, 7:30 to 2:30, yes, that's their contractual time, and that's the time they will be here. Other questions about the plan?
So, the rooms are gonna all be set up desks 6 feet apart, but they still have to wear masks? during
Yes.
Instruction?
The question by Mrs. Bartlett is, the desks will be separated 6 feet apart, they still have to wear a mask. The answer to that is yes, you will still be required to wear a mask in school for most of the time, but there will be mask breaks during the day that will be coordinated and scheduled and so forth. Especially when we can maintain that 6 foot distance, okay? We know, anybody who's been in a classroom, remembers being in a classroom, I know we've got a teacher that was on the board here, the teacher standing up front, or two teachers, one was still here, sorry. The teacher standing up in front, 6 feet away from the kids, and the kids sitting there like they're in the schoolhouse is not realistic. There's gonna be times, especially for you elementary teachers out there and have taught elementary, kids are gonna need assistance, and they're gonna violate that 6 foot distancing plenty of times, depending as you even get to the younger. So the mask on and off in those situations are gonna be challenging. So having the mask on, especially as teachers are working with kids or the distances can't be maintained, they're gonna have to be on. If there are situations and times where we can have a little bit of time where there's no movement, and we're 6 feet apart, those might be times when we can designate mask breaks and so forth for the kids that are here. I mean, without mask breaks, which are required, by the way, that's not something I'm making up. You can all see how difficult it would be for long periods of time not to be able to have those breaks, especially for younger kids. And I use younger kids for everybody. It's a challenge.
For the three options, how does it look for, like, if they're here half day? What does it look like for busing? I mean, how many bus runs are you gonna be doing, and is it gonna be feasible to do that if you only have a small amount? You know what I'm saying? Like, are you gonna keep that option the whole time, or if parents aren't, or they didn't choose that? And because you're gonna be doing a high school run, and then back-to-back a elementary run, and then half day do a go home, and then come back, and it just seems like a lot of back and forth.
Yeah, so transportation and the way we're gonna have to run the question was the back and forth, are we gonna be able to handle the half-day option? Are we gonna be able to handle all the transportation requirements that are in this plan? We've had a lot of discussion about it. Certainly transportation and time for transportation is increasing under this plan. There's a lot more runs going and some back and forth. That's gonna be with any plan, because just by sheer capacity issues on the bus. We think we can handle that. We also are working out schedules and plans if there's opportunities where high school kids could get their classes and potentially get on a bus to go home during the day too, where we could get them out of the building for, earlier than necessary if they're out of classes, so they're not sitting around, especially as the kids get older where they may have less classes in their schedules. We're looking at that. We're using this half-day option. A lot of this is being driven by surveys. The general feeling is parents are concerned over the full day with the way the school is going to be set up and in the PPE and all the things. They're concerned about their child being able to do a full day of that. So we got into this hybrid option where we thought, if we offered a half day, we could at least get the kids here. A lot of the kids that might choose the remote, because I want to stress that and I hope people agree with this, there's no substitute for the in-person piece. So the more kids we can get to do the in-person piece with us and we can get that face-to-face instruction, the better. The hybrid option, especially with the young kids, is really, really important because we can get them here for a good chunk of morning time instruction. Just Michael, you know that, how good the morning times are for you. So we think we can get a good chunk of that during that time. The real worry is the loss. What did we lose from March to June? And if we don't offer options for parents, my concern with the not offering options is that there will be parents out there that choose just a simple homeschool route on us. And that would be another whole year of homeschool without us having contact with those kids. And So now you'd be looking at a half year plus a full year of homeschool and, and returning. So I know Mrs. Holmes has been really strong on this. She thinks she can do a lot with as much time as we can give her, and that half day gets there. So, we're hoping that we can get as many kids to choose the half day or the full day, and we can create a safe environment for them. Again, honoring the fact that there will be parents that want to remain remote.
So I don't have a packet, but the middle school or the 7th and 8th grade, is that totally remote? Or that's the Monday?
So the question by Mrs. Michael is the high school schedule about 7th and 8th grade, what is it? They'll all be placed in an AB, so it'll be an every other day schedule for all 7th through 12 students. Full day of in-person, full day of remote.
How successful were you, or do you feel that the survey? I know you did it like an on-call, you did an email. What was like the feedback? Did you get a good percentage back?
Yeah,
Or?
so the question by Mrs. Michael is the survey, the parent survey we sent out recently for just some thoughts on different plans and ideas that, and again, I want to reiterate the survey piece to the parents and guardians listening at home. This was just a snapshot of where we're at, what people are thinking at this point in time. The formalized piece of it will happen in the upcoming weeks. But what that survey really did for us, Mrs. Michael, is show us that people wanted options in that case, and the turnout was really strong. I would say we got almost all the elementary parents, and Mr. Broadbent.
Yeah, close to 300.
Oh, good.
High school.
Yeah.
kids, and we're talking 317 kids total.
That's really good.
Yeah, so we got a big time turnout in terms of the survey. So that gave us a lot of good data to what the parents and guardians were thinking out there. And everybody has their own situation. We know that. We know, the remote option might be the best option, the half day option might be the best, and the full day is the only thing that some parents can choose. So we needed to, especially with the younger kids, try to figure out a plan that could accommodate as much as we could.
I have a question from the audience at home. Will the school be providing PPE masks to the students every day, and are they able to wear plastic face shields? So,
good question. So Mrs. Bartlett's question is on PPE, school-provided PPE, and the type of PPE that you use. The face shield can be used, but it can't be used by itself. That's an enhanced protection. So a face shield with a mask is permitted. You can't have just a face shield with no mask. There's open area that's not permitted. Have masks for everybody. So if a student comes to the bus and doesn't have a mask, we will have masks on the bus to provide them disposal. So yes, we will have masks for them. I'll reiterate this. I think I mentioned this in the beginning. I think it's really, really important that, if feasible or if possible, that parents get masks that their kids are comfortable with, and bring them in almost like a school supply that they would purchase for their children to start the school year. I found, for myself and for adults and kids that I know, that the masks are out there. And different masks feel better than other masks for people. So I think, that would be an advice piece for those that haven't gone that far. That even if you've been using the disposables, those are fine, and that's what we'll have to offer here for sure. But there's some good masks out there that fit your face and are a little more comfortable, I would say, especially if you're wearing them for longer durations. Did I answer all that, Ms. Brown? Okay. Other questions from the board? I'm going to, just to talk about this, I have some questions that were emailed to me, which I'll address once the board discussion is complete. And then Mrs. Sheets is also taking questions. So I will address all the public questions at the conclusion of this as well. With that being said, other board-related discussions as part of this.
You have to submit the plan tomorrow. Have they given you like a time frame of the turnaround when you'll hear back?
So the question by Mrs. Michael is the plan submission tomorrow. If we got any feedback on the turnaround from the Department of Health and the SED review of these? No. What I know is that we are required to have them in tomorrow, and Governor Cuomo is expected to make announcements somewhere next week, one of the days next week. I think that'll be a big deal with this whole thing. So I don't expect anything immediate from this, unless there's something lately we have to add to it or something, and feedback we get. I don't know if the Department of Health will address it quicker, but I wouldn't expect much feedback or approval type of items until we move forward, especially with the governor expected to speak on that next week.
I have a lot of questions.
Yes, Mrs. Gallagher.
Will the kids be able to bring in water bottles and their own water and they have some place to put that?
So the question by Mrs. Bartlett is water, their own water bottles and filling stations, yes. So obviously we need to provide water, we need to provide filling stations for their water bottles, and yes, they would be able to bring water into the building as well. Other questions?
That was always allowed though, right?
Mr. Michael?
All the kids could bring in water, even
Yeah.
before this, yeah. they-
Yeah, the difference, the question is, that's always been allowed, kids can bring water. Yes, kids can bring water in, that's never been a concern or issue. The good issue right now is the water fountains and us developing manners to which to, kids who don't have water bottles to have filling stations and to be able to fill water bottles if needed, so, and that can't be done through a fountain. We have some water fountain filling stations in here that we can use, but we're gonna need more than what we've got, so we might need portable ones to come hallways and things like that. Other questions, comments, thoughts on what was presented tonight from the Board of Education? I know it's a lot. It's a lot of things. It's pretty extensive planning and trying to figure it out. And I'm not gonna stand up here and say that everything we've designed here is perfect. I do anticipate things that are gonna happen that we're gonna have to adjust that aren't gonna work as well. We'll see how the morning entrances would go if that happens. Those are gonna be concerns. I know Mrs. Holmes is not exactly as confident as I am that we're gonna be able to roll the elementary in here that quick and social distancing, but we'll see. Maybe I'll have to monitor it. So we'll see. Other questions or comments from the board before I take the public questions?
Just thank you for your heart. I mean, I can't imagine the administrators and putting this together and the time consuming and all the changes. It's overwhelming, so heads off.
Mrs. Michael was thanking the administration and all the people that have been involved in this process. So thank you for that. I can't, I stand up here and talk, but I can't even tell you what I've asked everybody. Poor Mr. Broadbent just got here and we're throwing 100 things at him, so, Mrs. Holmes is really guiding the elementary, Mr. Doherty, with our special education, and Mr. Gray, our cafeteria doing the everyone, there's been so many different people who have taken their area and provided ideas, the teachers, the groups, the safety meetings, those kinds of things to try to develop a plan. Again, this is a point in time plan, and we'll see how this evolves and go from there. With that said, I'll turn this over to public comment. I'll start with the questions that I received prior to the meeting. I opened up the questioning before this presentation so that people can start submitting questions. And again, they're able to submit questions right through the meeting. And then, obviously, there'll be ongoing discussions with anybody that has this. I'll start with the first question. The first question came from Emily Tyson. What about VP Tech kids? I have yet to hear anything about the plan from BOCES in West Canada. I think I addressed that during the meeting. Right now, VP Tech kids will be Monday through Friday in person, bused from their home to BOCES and back. Okay, so at this point in time, I see that as an in-person program. College classes will be offered right at BOCES. The second question I had was from Ann Bowder. Will West Canada Valley offer a choice of in-school or online learning? Should West Canada Valley return to in-school only classes? When will all that be decided? If I choose to homeschool my children, the state requires I register them 2 weeks prior to classes beginning. Once school does reopen, what will happen if there's COVID-19 exposure to school? So there's a number of questions there that she's asking. I think I've answered most of them. We are offering a full day class. We're offering a full day remote. We're offering a full day or a half day. For the high school, we're offering the every other day and a remote option. So I think there are options there to choose from. Homeschooling is always an option. That's a submission to the district, as always, for the intent to homeschool. That would be a program that is the same as it always is, and will be done independently outside of the district's purview, although we oversee that homeschooling program. If there is a COVID-19 exposure, the Department of Health will be it'll be reported to the Department of Health any suspected cases. If there is a positive case, that goes immediately to the Department of Health, who then will become partners in tracing, and the guidance and everything that goes with that decision making will come from the Department That will not come from us in Valley or Mr. Shepherd. They will guide us on those decisions. Next question is from Tara Davis. Said if the students will have virtual school, even partial, will they be following a schedule? Will the teachers be virtually teaching live like in the classroom? Will the students in attendance be mandatory and participation also? My expectation for my own daughter is to have her virtually learn and that she's expected to follow a schedule and that the school and teachers are providing live classroom learning in real time where she can ask questions and participate. So our intention for the remote learning is to have an active instruction going on with those students at home, as I mentioned during the presentation, where a student can interact with the teacher live in live form. We do not just record it or any other type of instructional type independent work only. There will be in-person instruction and schedule, as I mentioned, for all of these kids will be structured.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yes, Ms. Smith.
If you have a kid on campus taking algebra from 8 to 9, and you've got a remote kid in the same class, is that kind of what it's gonna look like? Like, the teacher's gonna be able to be live streaming?
Yeah, so,
Is that what that means?
yeah. So the question for Mrs. Michael at this point is how will the live streaming look and how that will be scheduled? It could be scheduled in a couple of different ways. There could be a remote period where the teacher is just with remote kids during that period. There could be a time where it potentially could be simultaneous, where you might have 3 kids at home and the rest of the kids in front of you, and it's being streamed live to their home place. There's a number of different thoughts and ideas that are being discussed, but nothing's been finalized, and I think it might be different for every situation depending on how the scheduling goes.
Because if they're remote learning, they're gonna have an instructor assigned, because I know that can happen during closure, like
Yeah.
people like, my kids being assigned things, but there's no face-to-face or screen to face-to-screen, you know what I'm
Yeah,
saying?
understood. So Mrs. Michael's question is, there was limited face-to-face at times during the spring period. The difference this time is instruction. So if you have period 3 like you would in West Canada and you were in person, that schedule will be defined. So you'll have to be in person from 9:45 to 10, whatever. And so that's part of what I discussed with the commitment to remote. Just because you are remote, those are for safety reasons, you're at home, but the expectation of your schedule, the only difference is you're not sitting at your desk, you're sitting in front of your computer. The next question came from, sorry, my eyes here. Kelly Keller. My husband and I are concerned with daycare for 2 children. If you go to a hybrid schedule for elementary students, the first concern is finances. We can't afford to have children full days, plus the instruction while they're in daycare wouldn't happen. And I'm summarizing your question because we do have that answered already. I think the concern from Ms. Keller was that there wouldn't be a full day option for her kids and how she would handle that. And we do have that full day option. So if for those parents that are ready to choose that, you will have the schedule that you normally have for the normal time period. The next question is from Margaret Passage. It says, if in-person classes resume, will each student's temperature be taken every day? And if yes, will this be done school or prior to them getting on the bus? So we've answered that question a couple of times. I'll just reiterate it again. The temperature check before they get on the bus is the responsibility of the parent. We're hoping that they take that responsibility seriously and do not put their child on that bus in the morning. They're the temperature check for the bus. We are the temperature check for the building. So once they arrive at the building, they'll be temperature checked here. And again, if there is a temperature or COVID-like symptoms, they'll be sent to isolation and be sent home at that point in time. The next question is again from Margaret Passage. Will every student be provided with a Chromebook this year? The answer to that is yes, as I discussed. One-to-one devices for every student in the district. It's good planning by us here. Obviously, the planning was for other reasons, but it's going to work out pretty well for us because we do have devices in place for all of our students. So yes, the answer is yes to that question. The next question is from Kelly. I apologize for the name. Khalid. What is that? Rippy. I have children with asthma who cough during the winter. Is coughing a symptom of COVID that would require this isolation? So the question of coughing and whether that creates isolation, the answer to that is no. Obviously, a sneeze or a cough doesn't automatically put you in isolation. There are symptoms. There are multiple symptoms It doesn't always involve a temperature. Generally, it's an evaluation by our nurse and then a communication with school physicians and Department of Health as to what they're seeing and then advising that situation. So the answer to that is no, simply a cough for an asthma kid, or, doesn't necessarily indicate COVID in isolation. The next question is from Ian Bowder. Should school open and a student tests positive for COVID, how does the amount of absences a student can have in a school year come into play? That's a good question. So when you're forced into quarantine or you are COVID positive, anybody who goes home, we could potentially, depending on the health of that person, be offering still remote instruction for that person. So someone who gets quarantined doesn't necessarily mean their education stops. They may have to go from in-person to remote instruction at that point in time. So those days in attendance would count. Obviously, in terms of a health issue, whether it's COVID or any other health issue, those days generally aren't impacted by that because there'd be medical documentation. So in terms of attendance, we can't control illness and sickness at the time. Our attendance policies are driven to our kids coming to school and choosing not to come to school just for non-health related reasons. So health related reasons are always a legal excuse to be absent. The next question is from Courtney Valasek. Are teachers and students required to wear masks when they are left apart during instruction? So the question I believe that Mrs. Valasek is asking is that if there is an open room during that time, are they required to wear the mask? Again, there are mask breaks, there are 6-foot distancing. So if you're alone and there's no distancing and there's nobody there, that would be an opportunity for a mask break. If you're in another room or in an area that's not with the kids and you're not around anybody, those would be opportunities for mask breaks. So those all have to be put in place regardless of staff, students. There are going to be times during the day where we need to have those in place. We just need to do any of the scheduled mask breaks or the organized mask breaks in terms of time where we're distanced. The next question is from Cheryl Goranchek. Does minimal movement in middle school mean that grades 7 and 8, I'm assuming this is students, will be in the room all day with teachers coming into the rooms? So it's a really good question, Ms. Goranchek. We're really looking at creating a true isolated hallway with 7th and 8th grade that's cohorted, what is limited movement as possible in distance movement. I won't go as far yet to declare that we're going to move teachers into those rooms, because I think where it's possible we could do that. Other chances of movement may be minimal at times, but essentially we're going to try to keep them in that same cohorted wing with their cohort group. But I wouldn't be able to confirm for sure until we know numbers and scheduling and all of that, whether it would be full teacher movement or mostly teacher movement, or if there would be times kids have to transition. For example, just for middle school, we may need a science room for science reasons. And we have specific science labs and rooms that we use. So to declare that the science teacher was going to immediately push into an English room or whatever might not be feasible. We might need that science room. So, but again, in most cases, we're going to try to limit the movement.
PJ,
Yes, Mr. Keller.
do we have any middle school teachers in the high school wing?
So the question by Mr. Kemmler is, do we have any middle school teachers in the high school wing? One of the plans and one of the things that we are designing right now is changing classrooms, and we've talked to the teachers about this. Where they're located now may not be where they're located for size reasons and grade levels specific. So yes, middle school wing to that room, switching around. Because we're in the middle school is an area where we can really treat it like a cohorted area and keep it limited. So yes, there will be some teacher movement in terms of where the classroom is now versus that. The next question is from Emily Tyson. What if a child has a compromised immune system and they go to VP Tech? That's a question, Mrs. Tyson, I think probably we would have to discuss together to understand the concerns, the individual concerns you have for your child, the program piece. We'd have to talk with BOCES about that. I'm not sure if that question is trying to see if there is a remote option for VP Tech. At this time, I don't see that as a remote option. However, with the medical reasons, certainly that would be a discussion item. But I think for this purpose, it's a great question, but I think we'd have to answer that more on an individual basis because it is a regional program. The next question is from Melissa Lowell. Will there be professional learning provided for instructional staff? If so, how often and when? So I kind of mentioned that in the beginning. We going as far back as the closure period began to offer professional development to all of our teachers. And as things became really evident of where we were at, that professional development in regards to instruction, remote learning, strategies, resources, and all those things have been really accelerated as we've gone through the summer. We have had numerous opportunities and continue almost on a daily basis to have opportunities for professional development. We are also working with instructional coaches. We are working with CASDA out of Albany to professional develop certain areas of instructional techniques and questioning and mapping and so forth. But in regards to the remote learning, we have really focused our professional development attention all summer on that. So they got a hands-on experience from March to June on the fly, and we've fully accelerated that, knowing that the remote piece of this was going to be a big part of it. Mrs. Chief, do you have any further questions?
I have one more from Mrs. Balasek. What about the heat index on the elementary upstairs side in Mass?
So the question is from Courtney Balasek again. The question is on the upstairs, especially track side of our elementary, the heat levels that are up there, the mass associated. Certainly, during periods of time during our school year, we have our facility doesn't have air conditioning. So there are areas, in specific areas that she's mentioned, that are a little hotter than others. The big piece of that is trying to regulate that heat, but also bring in the outside air, which at times can be humid. There's no doubt that we'll have some hot situations that may require further mass breaks or potentially some outside or secured areas where we can get to at times to do. I think we're going to need to be creative. The first few months of school are a big part of that. As everybody knows, the fall tends to be hot during the day. We try to draw in as much cold air as we can at night, fresh air to keep that. But certainly we'll have to make accommodations for that heat. In terms of the ventilation, the air circulation, that part of it has been taken care of. Circulation, the airflow, the filtering, the outside air, and so forth. Unfortunately, I don't have an answer for the temperature levels at times with no air conditioning, but we're certainly going to have to get creative at times, especially if students are in Mass.
Is that part of the building all along the football field? The whole top second floor? So how many classrooms would that be? If you go to the top of the stairs and go left, that's what grade? I'm trying to.
So the question by Mrs. Michael is it the football side of the field that we're discussing? The answer to that is yes. So the upstairs in general can tend to be hotter, like it is in homes and so forth. But specifically the track side rooms, because that's the sun side, tends to be a little bit warmer than the opposite side of that. So there are about 8 to 9 classrooms, Mrs. Holmes, you know, yes, on both wings. That's 3rd and 4th grade, and 5th and 6th. The upper grades are up there for the most part.
This way, that way?
No, like 4 or 5 that way on the track side. There's double that, probably 8 to 9 on both sides of the hallway, track side. So there are some classrooms that are there. That's always been a concern and issue even prior to this pandemic, but it's certainly something that we'll have to adapt to, especially when the PPE and so forth. Any other questions, Mrs. Sheets, at this time?
Yeah, let's see, I got, Tanya Macrina has a couple. If a student has a fever while in school, does the school give them a COVID test, or they go home and parents can decide if a test is administered?
So we'll stop with that one. So the question is from Tanya Macrina. The question is, if the student has a temperature, does the school administer a COVID test? The answer to that is no. There are no COVID tests for us, nor are we going to be administering any COVID tests. Our obligation at that time is to identify the temperature, separate the student from into isolation, and report the temperature check to the Department of Health. At that point in time, the Department of Health will take it from there.
Has an isolation room been chosen?
So, not yet, because we need to have one on both sides of the building. We're trying to coordinate it so it's near the nurse's office a little bit. We're moving some classrooms around, so we're hoping to create 2 isolation rooms that are near, that are spaced enough to have more than 1 child, but also near the nurse's office as well.
Who covers that?
Yeah, very good question. Mr. Kemmler asked the question, who covers the isolation room? So in a normal situation, you know, the obvious answer would be the nurse, but the nurse has a job that day to do that's separate from the isolation room. So we will have to create situations where we have somebody who monitors that isolation room until the child's picked up. So we'll have to have someone scheduled into that room. Did she have another question?
Yeah,
Mrs.
do
Sheets?
the bus drivers screen students for fevers?
Do the bus dri- Is this Mrs. McCrean?
Same
again?
one, yeah.
So Mrs. McCrean's second question is, do the bus drivers screen children for fevers? The answer is no. The initial screening for the bus is at home before they get on the bus, and the initial screening for the school is us. They will be temperature checked when they get here, but there won't be a temperature check upon getting on the bus. They will be required to wear a mask when they get on the bus, but the assumption at that point in time before they get on the bus was that they've been tested at home and are not temperature or symptom free.
And then her last part was medical situation like asthma, how does that affect kids and wearing a mask? Do they get to be put somewhere so they can remove their mask?
So medical conditions in any of this are a big variable to the plan that we have here. So depending on the medical documentation that's involved with kids who may have asthma or other related issues that are in person, certain enhanced accommodations will need to be made for those students for sure. And again, this is where that communication and collaboration and working together with recommendations to parents and our staff to make that work for that situation.
And I have one more. Jenna DeSantis, what about the regional program for excellence? Are the internships still going to be available or not?
So the question is from Jenna DeSantis. It's a very good question. Regional program for excellence, which is a great program for our kids here and the kids in the region, and internships that are out there. I don't have an answer for that piece right now, although most, if not all, the regional pieces have been canceled at this point. However, I don't want to say it's completely gone in case there is work being done virtually. That's something that I'll write down at this point in time. Is something we'll need to look into in terms of where those programs lie. Right now, these outside, traveling outside of the building and going to these types of things is really limited at this point. So I'd be interested to hear if there's plans in place for that. But I don't know the answer to that right now.
And then I have one more from Cheryl Warrencheck. Can middle school, high school students be dropped off anytime between 7:30 and 8:15?
So the question is from Cheryl Warrencheck, is asking for middle school and high school students, can they be dropped off anytime between 7:30 and 8:15? Yes. So the answer to that question on the drop-offs, that's the range of time in the morning that anybody can be dropped off. Our buses will be dropping off, our parent drop-offs will be happening. So anytime during that, what we have right now is a 45-minute time frame, it can happen. So somebody who could be here at 8:15 to start the class, that would be fine, and they can be dropped off earlier if need be as well. So there will be a place for them for temperature check, breakfast, and getting to what we call the home.
Who will supervise them?
So the question by Mr. Kemmler is who will supervise the transition from 7:30 to 8:15? That will be the teacher. They will go to their first period class or wherever they're assigned to for first period. And then once all the kids arrive for that period, between that time frame, the class will begin at 8:15 or whatever time we designate as the start.
Same for elementary?
Same for elementary, yeah. They'll get the breakfast, go to the elementary teacher. Once that class is set and everybody's arrived by bus or parent transportation, will begin the instruction in that class. So yeah, they'll go to the teacher that they're assigned to.
Is the food going to be in the room, or do they have to go to the kitchen? How does that work?
So the question by Mrs. Michael is the food, or speaking of breakfast, Mrs. Michael, yeah. So breakfast at this point in time, we're thinking that for those students, we're talking elementary, for example, are going to go in through the cafeteria door. We're going to temperature check them. They're going to pick up their breakfast and go to their classroom. In the high school, same kind of thing, except for we may have them spaced out enough where they can get their breakfast, eat in the cafeteria, go directly there, and then go to their first period. Again, details of some of these things are yet to be completely defined, but that's the overall framework for that in the morning. Mrs. Sheets?
That's it for me.
It looks like it concludes our questions from the public. Do we have other questions from our board members? Mr. Kemmler?
I would assume teams August, that you are going to have a meeting with all your substitutes.
So the question by Mr. Kemmler is
And
substitute
basically, Or
teachers.
is it going to be, you're in the Shark Tank, just swim?
So the question by Mr. Kemmler is the substitute teachers and the training for them. So training for everybody, Mr. Kemmler. And I think the substitute teachers who are here need to be, if they're not listening tonight, we need to have the clear plan in place for them, so they know if this is something they want to continue to do as well. I do anticipate some of the subs that have maybe come in and have been very good for us over the years, at this point in time, not being, someone who would want to continue that at this stage of the game. But certainly all the training and all the things that a teacher would have, they're going to need to have, and all the health training and so forth. And again, once they hear all of that, they're going to have to make their own decisions on whether they want to continue doing it. That's a region and statewide concern substituting. What that pool of candidates wasn't good before, and there's certainly concern on what that pool will look like now.
What's the plan? Suppose you can't get a substitute. What's the plan?
Yeah, so Mr. Kemmler's question, what's the plan if we can't get a substitute? I guess that happens quite often here. Hopefully it won't happen more than it does now, but we have to adjust and move people around within the building and do our best. I know principals, I've been in classrooms before, there's been different situations that we just have to cover, even if it's for a period of time where we can move some people around during the day. You just make do in the morning, it's kind of part of the morning process. The concern is how big of a problem that's going to be. Is it one or two, or is it a number of subs? I do think there will be some teachers, some younger ones, hopefully, that we can get in here. I know we have some ones that we were getting involved when COVID hit, that I'm hoping they're going to want to get their foot in the door and start doing some subbing. Subbing is definitely training, all the things that are involved there.
Do you have any concerns with your social distancing in the classroom? I know some districts are having their AIS department take on classroom responsibilities so you can ensure I know we're smaller,
Yeah,
did that come up that you might need to do that?
So the question by Mrs. Michael is, how do we ensure social distancing? All of our teachers, especially in the elementary, right now are all hands on deck. So we will have teachers that are teaching classrooms in order to maintain limited class sizes and maintain social distancing. So I won't say every, because we haven't decided, we don't know our numbers just yet, in person versus remote.
It's all gonna take place, and who's gonna stay?
Yeah. So we may have a teacher who's doing remote students, your RTI or AIS, as you refer to, teachers, specialist people that we have might have their own classroom. So we're gonna have to use all of our teachers, and we've been given the leniency for this year under COVID terms to use teachers as we need to maintain that social distance. So for us to bring kids in every day here, the staff for business homes especially, are all gonna, be involved in classroom instruction for sure.
I do have one more question.
A question from the public as well, Mr. Sheets.
Jenna DeSantis again, how will band and chorus be arranged since there is a big group of kids in each?
So the question from Jenna DeSantis is band and chorus. I talked a little bit about this. These are plans that we're still working on at this point. What I can tell you about band and chorus right now is the instructional aspects of band and chorus. Vocal lessons, instrumental lessons, and those kinds of things can occur because we can create those in small groups. We can distance and teach kids to play instruments, teach kids vocal lessons. We might even be able to go a step further and create some virtual performances and things like that with small social distance groups. But the reality is at this stage of the game, there will be no whole group band or whole group chorus, as you know, nor will there be whole group band or whole group chorus concerts and things like that as we speak. Again, our hope is that at some point, some of these things change as time goes on, but to start the year, those things aren't going to happen. Other questions, Mr. Sheets? Okay. Any questions, further questions from the board before I kind of conclude this thing?
Say you had, for example, I don't know what I'm gonna you can pull them around my head, say 75% stay home. Now, when you could social distance where the rest of them could possibly come every day, or would you change that at all?
Yeah, so the question by Mrs. Bartlett is, depending on the options that everyone's heard tonight and what the dynamic is of the choices of those options, how would that impact the plan? Certainly, that's a big impact on the plan. So that was the purpose of the initial survey, to get an initial feel of where we were at. As time goes on here, those numbers could change one way or the other very, very drastically. So yeah, it's important that we get to a point very soon where we begin the plans, because there's a lot to do to get that done. But to use your example, if we had a large number of students that chose remote, there would be potential that we could create enough sections or enough classes here where we could be in person all the time, and then create instructional periods for the remote students as well. So yeah, in that scenario, if that were to occur, we would adjust that situation and plan. If at any point in time we could get kids here all the time and we could do all the mandates and social distance and do those things, we certainly would. If we could create periods for remote instruction, we certainly would do that as well. So yeah, the numbers are a big part of this change, so that could skew things quite a bit on both buildings. I'll even go a step further. I'll use elementary as an example. If there's 3 sections currently of 3rd grade, and we had a whole bunch of 3rd grade that was remote, so we really only needed 2 teachers to do the in-person 3rd grade. A 3rd teacher might be the full-day remote teacher from their room with all the remote kids in 3rd grade. And that's a clean, perfect example. That's not going to happen where it's clean like that, but that would be just an example of numbers and skew things. If we have a lot of in-person, more teachers we're going to need to do the in-person.
Just one more question, just as I'm thinking of, is coming into this, is your school, or is the campus gonna be like closed, like if there's like an emergency, whether the home drill, not a drill, but an actual, and that means everything's shut down and nobody can come back, so like, is your faculty and staffing limited in their hours? I know you might have some teachers that stay late, come back in the evening, you might have, and I know that then the fitness room can't be used, but are you gonna shut down the school?
Yeah, so the question by Mrs. Michael is, initially, early on, for a lot of reasons, is the time frame in which the school is occupied, is that gonna be limited? Did I say that correctly?
Yeah.
So initially, the school building will be limited for a number of reasons, because we're gonna want to very quickly get into the and, cleaning and so forth of all, what's my favorite word, sanitizing. Disinfecting, thank you. That's the other term I was looking for. Disinfecting. We want to get into those things, and those are generally done in unoccupied buildings. So there won't be any, right now, the indoor piece of this building is really going to be closed at nighttime. And I didn't get into this. There's no locker rooms, there's no pool, that kind of stuff right now as well. So.
What are you sanitizing with? Clorox, I hope.
Ms. Crosset, would you be able to, the question by Mr. Kemmler is, what are we sanitizing with?
Solution and the bleach that they use. They also are using electrostatic sprayer that coats everything, and as it dries, it kills everything. And that's been being used since March.
So Ms. Cross answered the question of the sanitization of the building. The Clorox, the bleach, diluted bleach supplements. We have machines that are disinfecting rooms through sprayers and things like that, which kill surfaces and air and remain there. So we've been doing that right along, even with the building. We've had staff in the building throughout the closure, so we've been doing that nightly because we have to disinfect even with all students here. So these are just things that will be enhanced, obviously, if students are in the building.
I have one more.
Another question from the public, go ahead.
Tanya Macrina, could you utilize the giant voice where you call families if that first class teacher is not available and either is a substitute, can eliminate exposure, and if so, will the student become absent?
Okay, so Mrs. Macrina's question, I believe, is in the absence of the regular teacher. Does that sound like what that is? And if we aren't able to find a substitute?
Right. Can you call people?
Yeah, so the question is, and I'm assuming this might be, I don't know if this is an elementary or high school type question, but could we potentially keep kids home for that day if there wasn't a teacher available? My answer to that is in cases like that, we're gonna find somebody to be that instructor that day in some way, shape, or form. But yeah, if you're talking about the call system, I anticipate using the call system quite a bit. There will be different situations I need to do that in. So, you know, if there were a situation where we needed to call students to limit any exposure, we would do that.
In our area, the internet is down quite a bit. So is that going to be like an excused absence or how would that be?
Yeah, so the question by Ms. Bartlett is the connectivity, the internet. You know, that's obviously a concern in rural areas anyway. We're going to create as much opportunity as we can for connectivity, internet access, and so forth, and to ensure that it's there. Are there going to be times when that it's, you know, hit, or there's things going on with that? Sure. Power outages for a day, who knows? We had the flood. I don't want to talk about that. If that were to happen during remote learning, that's a whole other dynamic. But yeah, there's certainly going to have to be adjustments to things that could happen to connectivity, and how we, you know, a kid who can't access it can't be necessarily, you know, I would say punished. I don't want to say that for not having connectivity for a short period of time. So we'll have to make adjustments to those type of issues. But we also need to support with hotspots and things like that for areas that don't have great connectivity. Try to do that. We're going to need better systems to do that. I think you're seeing some of the bigger companies understanding the interest in having these systems in place in rural areas. So hopefully this will be something that continues to move forward in connectivity. Other questions, Mr. Sheets? Any other questions from the board before I kind of wrap this up and summarize? Well, first, I want to thank everybody for their time tonight. I want to thank the board members for their input, their ideas, their thoughts, their questions. I want to thank the public for their questions. They had a lot of great questions tonight. You know, hopefully I did my best to answer them at this point in time. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions as we move forward into the weeks. You know, plan goes in. We have announcements from Governor Cuomo. There's changes with the virus. Different things are going to happen. I'm going to continue to communicate that the best I can to everybody. We're going to continue to provide updates. Our next regular board meeting is August 10th. You know, I'll assume we'll have some more updates at that point in time on this. But to the best of our ability, I wanted tonight to be a clear picture of what school is going to look like. And I think that's important. That people understand that the in-person instruction, what it's going to look like in this building, is far different than we typically are used to. There's not a lot of those great things that are extra behind the classroom right now that are being offered. And you know, I just want people to understand that as they get the choice. There are restrictions, there's mandates, and we've got to follow those. And certainly we're guided a lot by the guidance from the state. So with that said, I'll continue to keep you updated. I thank everybody again for coming tonight. I thank everybody in the public for their virtual questions. If you have further questions, continue to email Mrs. Sheets or myself, and I will try to address them beyond the meeting today. With that said, thank you. Can I get a board member to motion to adjourn? Mrs. Michael, seconded by Mrs. Lynch. All in favor of adjournment? Thank you, everyone.